In recent years, researchers have noted that there is actually a sharp drop-off in people believing in the basics of Christianity. This has been especially noticed amongst people under 30. But even those who still attend church and are found to hold actually more strongly to secular philosophies and beliefs, and have stout doubts about some basics such as the virgin conception and birth of Jesus, Jesus' resurrection, his ascension, or even the Trinity. Now we can really attribute this and say that part of this is due to what might be called truly the dumbing down of Christianity. A dumbing down that has taken place over the last many decades. The 1960s were actually a watershed for this. A time where the beginning and loss of faith in Christianity can really begin to be pinpointed. For the 60s were certainly that time when it became much more fashionable to question all established authority. And at the same time, to begin a deep exploration of other things. The old structures, the old beliefs were doubted, while simultaneously the psychic world was made more available through psychoactive and psychedelic drugs. And there was an influx of Eastern religion. In response to these things, where people were saying, I'm finding my spirituality in LSD or in psilocybin, or these Eastern religions seem to be much more attractive and interesting to me than this old-fashioned fuddy-duddy thing called Christianity, where my parents dragged me to church. In response to this, frankly, the churches started up what would become known as the seeker-friendly movement. Mm-hmm. And as the seeker-friendly movement gained steam, attractive liturgies were developed and promoted. And the teaching of what would be called the hard things of the Bible diminished, as if those might just turn off the seeker. For at that moment, they were. They would turn people off because it wasn't as novel to go to church and have organ music as it was to go someplace and hear the sitar playing. It wasn't as exciting to go and take communion as it was to drop acid. And so it is that they said, we need something more exciting, something more grasping, with the rationale that if you just come and meet Jesus, everything will change. But over the decades, we've learned to ask the question that I so often ask. Which Jesus? And what's this Jesus that you're proclaiming if you absolutely don't have any idea what he taught? Or if you actually disagree with what he taught and live another way and just call out on the name of Jesus or enjoy his new attractive liturgies. One example as well was what happened in the 60s was the churches abandoned the saying of the creed on Sunday. Mm-hmm. Up until that time, every Protestant church would say the Nicene Creed, Presbyterian, Methodist, Episcopalian, Lutheran. You always said the creed. But the creed was one of those old-fashioned, stuck-in-the-mud type of things. And so, with the loss of the creed on Sunday, we lost an idea of reciting what was believed. What came with these losses and these changes was an ignorance for what 15 centuries had been the definition of what Christianity was. 15 centuries of belief being fed into the heart. And so it was that at that time, for the Protestant churches, as they dropped the creeds, we ended up making up novel things to fill in. The Catholic Church was not in much better shape, if any better. Vatican II caused an even greater move to the dumbing down of Christianity than the loss of the creed. For centuries, the Catholic Church did not demand that the laity have any true understanding of what the spirituality and scriptures were about. I'm still astounded that I meet people that are over 70, raised Catholic and before Vatican II, who did not actually know where Adam and Eve were in the Bible. And the response when I was kind of dumbfounded by that was, the priests never demanded us do that. We just go to Mass. And if we go to Mass and take communion and be good Catholics, we're fine. We'll teach the clergy, and the religious will know that stuff. Well, it was bad enough before Vatican II that after Vatican II, they took the Mass even, that was the only thing that was given to the laity, and it became a semi-folk song, coffee house type of gathering. Again, thinking that they'd get the burgeoning hippie generation to come in. And so it is that we sit in 2023, standing here with Catholic and Protestant alike, having a difficulty in truly articulating even the basics of the faith. For even a fairly devout Christian who may still firmly assert a belief in the virgin birth, assert a belief in the resurrection of Jesus, when then asked, what does that mean? Really not be able to articulate it. What does that change for your view of the world and of life? I don't know, I just believe it. And certainly, most people have a great difficulty in being able to articulate the importance of the ascension of Jesus and that it even happened. We forget that. But one of the ones that is completely forgotten is the one that's at the end of the creed, which were spoken of in Isaiah and Paul today. The resurrection of the flesh. Often there is a dumbfounded look on one's face when I say, and I think, yes, we're going to bodily rise. Huh? These decades have erased these 15 centuries, and now we'd actually say 20 centuries. Because when I say 15 centuries, I'm marking it from the Council of Nicaea when we got the Nicene Creed put out. Once stop saying, what do we say at the end of the creed? As we will say, and I believe in the resurrection of the body, which is really resurrection of the sarx in Greek, the flesh. I believe it. And since we haven't said it, people have forgotten it. People forget the ascension because we don't say, I believe in Jesus, born, of the Virgin Mary, resurrected, and ascended into heaven and sitteth at the right hand of the Father. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess theologians like that stuff. I just want to make sure it's good music that's not more than 5 years old, because that's passé, Not the fault of the person saying that, I don't think. The fault of those who are attracting them that way. The drive for better discipleship, thankfully, is beginning to return, both in Protestantism and in Catholicism. In Anglicanism of America, they really are the ones that did the research and said, what, the greatest harm was done? The Sunday school movement, because it just taught you that Jonah was swallowed by a whale, but didn't tell you why or what it meant. We need discipleship, not Bible study. We need discipleship, which means I know what the Bible is saying so I can act on it. And so there's a movement for discipleship amongst Anglicans. And then there is recently, only I guess it was last week, when Bishop Robert Barron was over at the World Youth Gathering in Portugal for Catholics, when he proclaimed out, we need to stop dumbing down the faith and start meeting the hearts of the youth that need to know and want to know. There is a return that's coming and bubbling up. But in that return, we have to be careful not to put complete and too much blame on this dumbing down of Christianity. Because another very potent factor has entered the game that may be the bigger game changer than churches being foolish. And that is the internet. Now, it's not only that people get too little information about their faith in church, but now they're getting too much information about spirituality and religion elsewhere. The seeming competition between religions has now accelerated in modern times. What was once just the nice isolated corner occupied by scholars of comparative religion is now an aspect of the marketplace. It's a commonality and validity that is seen across the beliefs of the religions, now spreading out before everybody. So there is, at this moment in history, as we watch the diminishing of Christianity, that we can look and say, there's a confluence of the forces attacking Christianity. A confluence of the dumbing down by Christians, thinking that all they have to do is get the word out about Jesus, but not knowing what they're saying. Put that together as it comes face to face with an intensifying education and increased information about world religions. This would then have a confluence that says Christianity is not unique. Christianity sometimes doesn't seem to hold a candle to some of these other things. It's because we don't understand. We don't understand what we're actually proclaiming in the midst of this world. And with that ignorance, the other knowledge wins. Witchcraft looks a lot more interesting than virtues. Psychedelics are a lot more interesting than contemplation. Why? I can pop that thing and I can just be there on Friday night, kind of in a different world. I have to contemplate. Yes, it takes work, and you get your ego strong enough to be able to handle the other work. Oh, I didn't think I needed to handle it. I just got to see the cool visions. I got the nice feeling of being out on the beach, having eaten some mushrooms, and wow, do you know the colors? And like that is so cool. Just sitting there touching the dirt when you're high, you know. This brings us to the sense of how we need to know what we're talking about. Brings us to our scriptures today, especially our Old Testament and our epistle. For both of these are speaking about something that we've tended to forget. Again, what is it? The resurrection of the flesh. Really contemplate what that means. Really let that sink in and say, I believe that I'm going to rise in the flesh. When after I'm dead, my body will be joined with my soul once again. What does that mean? How does that change our vision of creation? How does that influence and inform your vision of heaven? What does that mean for your spiritual life right now? I don't really care how high I am if I'm trying to say there's another reality that is with the bodily reality, not just the cool neurons firing that cross over my different senses so that I'm now seeing sounds and hearing colors. Wow, that may be cool. That's your brain. What about your soul and your body coming together again? And what does it say about reality? These are the questions that have been lost to the common person. Questions that even 200 years ago, people at least were thinking and asking somewhat more. Being able to then answer, because people today are still asking questions. Those under 30, as you know, everybody under 30 asks questions. What's the meaning of life? And now what we say is, the meaning of life is, I don't know. I guess, we can go on the internet and ask, I can type in meaning of life and I can get a book. I have a book on the different wisdoms of different cultures at the office. That's that thick with quotes of all these different things. You get that out from the internet. Oh, that meaning of life is that I have karma and I'm going to be reincarnated and that I need to do this. It's like, that's the meaning of life. So live your life right now so you can be reincarnated. Which is it? Isaiah was describing how we will be reunited with our flesh. And Paul describes how this occurred first in Jesus. And then we'll later agree with Isaiah later in 1 Corinthians 15 about our joining in this very act of the resurrection of the flesh. All of a something very, very important, but very unique is coming out of here amongst the world religions. But when asked about this, the now well-informed, intelligent youth and adult, older adult, will be able to point how this very idea of the resurrection and the life again isn't unique. She may be able to then point and state that cultures and religions throughout the whole world have dying and rising gods. Mircea Eliade, this great mythologist and historian, wrote a book called The Myth of the Eternal Return, which is all the different gods that die and come back. And they do. Gilgamesh went down into the ocean, died, comes back up. That's the Babylonian one. The resurrection comes from the Babylonian times in exile. They just took Babylonian stuff. Let's take Greek. Dionysus, ripped to pieces, comes back together. The best one on this, Persephone. Demeter and Persephone, mom and daughter. What does Persephone do? She goes to the land of the dead. Oh, Jesus went there on Saturday. Oh, Jesus is another Persephone. See, it's all the same. She went to the land of the dead. Why? Because she ate a little bit of the Narcissus. Hades grabbed her. Now for 6 months of the year, Persephone is married to Hades down in Hades. But Demeter, her mom, goes around and says, hey, you can't have my daughter. Get Zeus to let her loose. So for another 6 months of the year, she gets to live with mom in the upper world. Oh, isn't it interesting that it corresponds greatly with spring? And so it is like when the plants die, Persephone goes down, and when the plants come back. And so we have these dying and rising gods all over the place associated with vegetation. It's the same thing. Why you Christians are so ignorant. You just want to mouth what your people leaders told you. Mouth what those old-fashioned people that didn't have any intelligence back there in the early days had to say. And that you believe, that it's only Jesus that came back. Fools, the world says to us. Because they got the internet. They can say this. Doesn't help that, on one level, Easter's right at the time of spring. Virgin births, dime a dozen throughout different mythologies. They even made it up, even though Buddhist historians don't agree with it. They say it is truly a myth because they know where Buddha came from, Siddhartha Gautama. But they said there's a myth of Buddha came out of his mom's hip, came out immediately, being able to speak and proclaim the doctrines. These things, dime a dozen for anybody that just types it in. So our society today is able to diminish the uniqueness of Christian faith while seemingly bring a brilliant analysis from the other religions and spiritualities that are now available on the internet. But as people such as Bishop Barron call for a greater teaching and discipleship, we'll see finally again, actually there are easy answers to all of these internet doubts. Paul certainly was no stranger to all these mystery religions. Buddhism had already made its way to the Middle East after 500 years, and so it was very clear about these religions that were going on. Paul certainly knew about Gilgamesh and all the Greek myths. So Paul's not sitting amongst them going, as some ignorant fool that goes, oh, I had to wait for Mircea Eliade to write his book and go, you got it. Paul knew it, but Paul answered the question that undercuts all of these other beautiful things. Great stories. See, Paul understood that myth is describing some process, either in the soul or in nature, in a very story form. It's how we always told it. But every myth and story people knew was about another dimension, not this one. It's the world of fairy tale, the world of myth. And in the world of fairy tale, every story starts once upon a time. Our modern fairy tale did it so profoundly. Everybody went, ooh, the first time they heard it and saw the spaceship go over, in a land far, far away. In a time, and it's like Star Wars is a fairy tale, and it's proclaimed one in a land far, far away at another time. This isn't reality here. And so what does Paul say? Christians, this is not some well-devised myth. Christians, this is real. This takes place in history, and it takes place in your life and in all our lives. It's not once upon a time, but in the time of Caesar Augustus, pinpointing the historical date of the virginal birth and conception. And then Paul tells us, the dying and rising God. Yes, it comes at spring because that's when Passover is. But did he really rise and die? And will he die again like Persephone does every year? No. Did he come and did we see him in the flesh? Yes. First Peter, then the other apostles, then 500, then James and everybody else. And finally, he actually came to me, says Paul. He came to me and taught me, and I saw him. We all saw him in the flesh. For like Thomas, if we wanted to, he would have let us put our fingers into his hands and to his side and said, I'm here in the flesh. And we know that he died outside of Jerusalem. This attests that it's not a mythic story, but historically and physically real. And now we hit the uniqueness amongst all of the internet stories you can find. And what does this then matter to us? It informs us about truly our vision of heaven, truly our vision of life after this one, truly our vision about who we are. We too will rise, as did Jesus, and as Isaiah prophesied about himself and the people of God. We too will live a glorified physical reality. If you think you're going to be floating on a cloud with a harp in some spiritualized place, that's not the resurrected, glorified body. It's a glorified creation that all creation waits for. our vision of who we are and who we're called to be is transformed when we contemplate this reality presented to us. So if we really wish to be those sophisticated and intelligent people, it's time for the people of God to once again embrace the depths and reality of the faith, to study them, to embrace them, and to live them out. It may be then that the researchers in a few decades to come will be astounded to see a rise rather than a fall in the promulgation of the gospel. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.